Escalating tensions with Syria. The United States, United Kingdom, and France coming together to work on a plan for a coordinated response to the suspected chemical weapons attack. Defense Secretary James Mattis taking a cautious tone yesterday over the risk of a military strike.
Looking at the Chemical Warfare Convention, I think it's by far in the best interest of civilization, certainly in the best interest of America, that convention be obeyed by the nations that have signed it.
Can you justify for the American people how going to war with Russia over Syria serves the interests of the American people?
No, Congresswoman, I can't answer that question. I'm not ready to speculate that would happen.
Joining us now is Eurasia Group, Middle East and North Africa practice head, Ayham Kamel. Ayham, how do you see this playing out based on what we know so far and what the United States has telegraphed?
So I think that there is an open debate within the administration as to what the right action should be. There are certainly preparations for a U.S.-led military strike in Syria. The danger here is the scope of that military operation and whether it actually creates more of a risk of a U.S.-Russia direct confrontation. I think that there are voices that fear that there will be retaliation from either Iran on U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria, or attacks on Israel as a response from the Assad regime and Iran, or potentially what is really alarming here, an escalation with Russia. So I think if we do get military strikes, it would be limited. It would be a punitive effort directed at a few military bases in Syria, Assad's military bases, not really extensive enough to cause a regional confrontation. But generally, that's why we have an uptick in geopolitical tensions. We've seen also missiles fired from Yemen onto Riyadh. This is just not simply about Syria. It's a much broader confrontation that we're talking about.
Mr. Kamel, how effective would those types of strikes be in terms of enforcing the chemical convention? What is going to be the issue that is going to drive a change in behavior? And this is the second time that the Assad regime has been accused of using chemical weapons. So, where does this take us if we do limited strikes?
Sure. I think that the intelligence that the U.S. has is that this was the Assad regime. It's not conclusive in terms of an investigation. But military action, what it does this time, if it's more extensive than the last time, it sends a stronger signal. It changes the calculus of the Assad regime. Basically, the costs of conducting chemical attacks in Syria. It does cost the regime a lot when part of its military capacity is taken off the equation here. And that would be the purpose of this operation. Whether there is a broader strategy in Syria to take Assad out, I think that's clearly not the likely direction. I think President Trump still wants out of Syria. That's his inclination. Perhaps members of his administration want something longer to deter Iran, to contain Russia. But I don't think that that's the likely strategy. Clearly, we have an open debate as to what the purpose of these strikes are. But I think at the end of the day, we'll end up with limited strikes just as a punitive measure to really deter Assad in the future.
Really quickly, last year, we went out of our way in the airstrike that the president ordered to avoid striking Russian forces. Can we do a strike on maybe multiple air bases and still do that this time around?
I think it's a lot more risky this time for several reasons. One, U.S. troops or Russian troops are deeply embedded in Syrian military positions, the command centers in Syria, so it becomes much more difficult to do that. Two, the nature of the intelligence work. You do not have an accurate picture at all times on where Russian troops might be or are located, so that makes it also more difficult to avoid confrontation. And also the nature of geopolitical tension. sanctions. The U.S.-Russia relationship is becoming much worse. We've seen a series of real sanctions levied last week. The U.S.-Iran relationship is deteriorating. So there's a context that makes this military operation a lot more risky than the last one. Right. So we've got to be very careful here around the risk of an intentional escalatory cycle that we get stuck in.
Ayham, thank you so much. Ayham Kamel, thank you for taking the time this morning.